Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Delving Deep ESO Podcast. Now, as you can imagine, based on what I just called it, the name is still a work in progress. I've gotten a couple suggestions, but none that really stuck out as like an obvious fit. So if you have a good name for the podcast, definitely leave it down in the comments below. And again, like I said last week, whoever comes up with the best one will basically take the win, take the cake. And that's what the podcast will be named going forward. Now, we have a jam-packed show today. In today's show, I'm going to start out by updating you guys on my gameplay experiences, as I did last week. Then we're going to get into some discussion about the most recent Ask Us Anything that was related to Craglorn, the economy woes going forward in ESO, and some crazy stuff going on with vampires and werewolves. And then finally, at the end, I'm going to tackle some of the viewer questions. So let's get right into it, shall we? Starting with my gameplay. So since last week, I've only had enough time to put in about 5 or 6 levels worth. I'm sitting, if I remember correctly, kind of right at the cusp of dinging to level 29. So I'm pretty close to the level 30 area, basically. Now, between hectic work week and planning and stuff for the forthcoming Easter holiday, time has been limited, as I said. But I've also kind of slowed down. After doing the podcast last week, I had mentioned that I was kind of zooming through it, not really taking my time and enjoying. Instead, I kind of taken it back a little bit, slowed it down, and decided to kind of group up and play with my guildmates and my girlfriend and have a group experience while questing. Went ahead and used the Rings of Mara and paired up with my girlfriend, as you would imagine. And the two of us have been questing quite a bit together, and I'm enjoying it a lot. Now, the boost from the Rings of Mara is actually quite noticeable, which was a surprise, honestly. I thought it would be mostly negligible, but it's actually quite noticeable straight away. Now, I was enjoying the soloing content and going through the story by myself before, but since kind of taking it back a little bit and doing some more group play and more group-oriented questing and stuff like that, I'm enjoying it even more. And I'm finding very quickly that the group play in ESO, even outside of dungeons, is easily the best content in terms of my enjoyment. Now, as of recording this bad boy, my Dragon Knight is now moved over from all light armor and instead is now in a mix of medium and light. And I've decided to also swap out my sword and board setup for a two-handed sword for a little bit more damage, and basically to take advantage of the passive cleave that comes from the two-handed skill line that makes it so light and heavy attacks cleave to enemies, and I'm enjoying that quite a bit as well. Basically what I'm doing now in combat is I'm running up, I throw down my destruction staff firewall, which was morphed to be huge now. It covers a huge area. I throw down a Dark Talons Immobilize, and if I've got party members around, they go in and they use the Impale, and usually that does it. If stuff is still alive at that point, I'm then in my two-handed sword flinging fire everywhere, and my AoE potential is pretty ridiculous. Again, especially if I have some people there with me. The Impale and the Shackles that come from the synergy abilities. If I use like a Dark Talons, they can go in and impale a whole group of enemies that are still stuck in fire. Usually that's enough to kill like anything. It's to the point now that I think it's probably a little bit OP. So, I really would not be surprised if like in a week from now, I see the patch notes and it goes, Dragon Knight's getting nerfed to the ground, because their group gameplay is ridiculous. And I know that I've had some past experiences as well where we had like 2 or 3 Dragon Knights in a dungeon group, and all of us would just throw down fire, throw down Dark Talons, impale, move on to the next thing. It's pretty strong, I have to admit. It's pretty strong. So I expect a nerf coming sometime, probably 2 impale. That seems like the biggest offender when you start stacking that stuff up. Now, outside of the AoE nonsense and the combat in general, I've also been running around collecting lore books that I may have missed and sky shards that I missed in the earlier zones. The lore books in particular, I've been keeping an eye out more and more, especially since questing with my guildmates and my girlfriend, because they apparently have eyes like a hawk, or I am just blind as all hell because I can never find them, but they find them easy as pie. They're like always pointing out to me like, you idiot, come back here, you missed the lore book. And the problem is I really want to get them because that's how you level the Mages Guild skill line. And I want my meteor. That's what I want. This is the main reason I want to go down that skill line, is so I can summon a meteor from the heavens to crush my foes in a fiery death, basically. And it's taken ages. It's moving at a crawl, basically, trying to get that skill line up. So I've been doing a good bit of that. Now, outside of really just running around and doing a little bit of questing, I haven't done any dungeons or anything. So gameplay basically has been at a minimum for me. I mean, I've played a little bit, done the grouping stuff, and anytime I have an open time window to put in even an hour or something like that, I am jumping in the game. And I am enjoying it a lot. I am enjoying Elder Scrolls Online quite a bit more than I would have imagined probably 6 months or a year ago when I first started getting into what this game was going to be. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for the gameplay. Let's move on to the news and discussion. Now, to start the news and discussion segment, let's get into the Ask Us Anything that was pertaining to Craglorn. Now, as what has become typical really with these Ask Us Anything little articles, they mostly answer questions which can be answered themselves as long as you have even the slightest semblance of a head on your shoulders. But I'll zoom through these as quick as possible, and we'll kind of talk about the more interesting ones. To start, are all the new zones going to be tailored towards groups? Nope, they're going to release content of multiple different types and varieties, so not every patch is going to contain an adventure zone. We only get rewards if you're at the top of the leaderboard. Again, no, as long as you complete the thing, you're still going to get your weekly reward and the normal loot drops in the trials. The timer that is in trials is only for the leaderboard. You don't have to beat the timer or anything. So again, as long as you finish the thing, you will get your rewards. You don't have to rush if you really don't want to. There will not be any new motifs to craft coming from Craglorn and the trials within, but there are going to be some good items to go in there to put some effort in for. Now, one person showed some concern about players and guilds finding a way to really skip around trash mobs and cheese bosses, and then also asked how much of a time sink these trials would be. Now, they said trial length will vary by group, obviously. We suspect it will range from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on your group's experience and skill level. Now, that seems really short to me, like really short, because coming from other games, the raid content, which this is equivalent to, is far longer, like far longer than that. And I would really, really hope that you don't spend 30 minutes in a trial once a week. That would be insane. That would be ridiculous. And I really, really hope that this is just a miscalculation or maybe some miscommunication or something, because that seems really, really short, because you can easily spend more than 30 minutes in one of the veteran dungeons. So for the truly challenging 12-man group raid style content to be 30 minutes, come on, that can't be right. I'm thinking there's some miscommunication there, because that can't possibly be right. Now, does Craglorn have separate instances for each alliance, and do all three alliances intermingle? Craglorn will function more similar to how Cold Harbor works now. Each alliance will have their own version, but it will be identical. Will there be more veteran ranks? There will. It'll go up to veteran rank 12 in the adventure zone. It'll be veteran rank 11 and veteran rank 12, but you can access the adventure zone and the trials within at veteran rank 1. Basically, all that they're saying is once you're at level 50, you can do this content. You don't have to quest through the other two faction zones, basically. Somebody asked about the Celestials that are in the Adventure Zone and where they've come from. Basically, they just said that the Celestials are a new concept based on existing lore for the Constellations and the Elder Scrolls games, and there's quite a bit of lore in Craglorn itself that should be interesting to fans of the series in general. How many resurrections are we talking about in the trials? Hard to know whether this stuff will be challenging or not without having some sort of idea on res numbers. And then they came back with, we're still working out the final numbers, and we think it'll be hard to get a sense of how often you'll need to use them before you've done a trial. But right now we're allowing 60 resurrections during a trial. Now, I would imagine 60 resurrections is for the group in general. So, I mean, that would be 12 people with the 60 resurrections, so you're maybe going to get 5 if you have to do 5 wipes, basically. But we'll have to see how that gets tweaked. Again, this kind of coupled with the 30-minute thing, something's not quite lining up, so we'll have to see what's going on with their trials once we get some more information. Now, how will they be accessed? Do they work like public dungeons? Can you queue for them? How do you get to them? And they said that trials can be accessed by either the physical entrance or by using the group finder to assemble a team. You could potentially go in solo, but the first group of monsters you encounter will wipe the floor with you. And then are adventure zones instant to your group? An adventure zone is a large area where you can explore and meet other groups along the way. The overland terrain is an instance. However, much of the content you'll find in Craglorn, like delves and points of interest, are instants to the group. So basically they confirmed what I had said last week about adventure zones and the way that they had phrased it. So the adventure zone Craglorn will be open just like any other zone, and potentially you could go out solo if there's enough people kind of just adventuring on their own out there. But to actually do the meat of the content, the points of interest, and the quests, which potentially will be instanced off as well, because there's quite a bit of that going on in this game, you'll want to have a group. But that's basically what they brought to the table for Craglorn in this Ask Us Anything. The majority of it was, honestly, I could give two shits about, but the mention of a 30-minute to an hour-and-a-half trial is worrisome. And then the mention of the 60 resurrections is pretty cool. I do like that they're trying to give some semblance, some idea as to what they're working with when it comes to that sort of thing. But let's move on into our next topic, which is the economy and the guild store system. So there are a couple things to talk about with the guild store system and its impact on ESO's economy, honestly. The first is the fact that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work very well right now. The idea of a guilds kind of equating to corporations, to businesses, and provoking trade between one another, it sounds like an awesome idea. Sounds like it should be really cool in theory, but it's so broken in the current implementation. People are hoarding to guilds, advertising with the most members, basically all over the place. Guilds are like, come join our trading guild. We've got 1,000 members. And basically people are going to join that because that's their opportunity to sell their wares if they're kind of trying to make some money. Some guilds are completely ignoring the original guild goals that they had set out. For example, looking to be a PvE or PvP, RP, etc., and instead are inviting any and every person that will possibly join them so that they can unlock guild stores and they too can get in on some money. And then once you get all past all that nonsense, right, that's bad enough, honestly. The actual in-game tools, the in-game functionality of the guild store just don't work. They're not polished, they're not well thought out. Searching for anything is a time waster, and it's a cumbersome process that will make you very frustrated rather than excited and ready to kind of engage in trading and in business. It's really bad, to be honest. It's bad at this point to where zone chat is just a spam wall of trading guilds and solo players trying to vendor their goods, provoking arguments in the chat box a lot of time, unhealthy amounts of competition for a single item from a single seller a lot of times, and there's a lot of cases of like swindling where people are taking advantage of the chaos going on in the chat, offering up goods that they don't actually have, and taking advantage of a player that's kind of being trustworthy, right? They're trying to be trustworthy with this person, but they don't get that trust in return, and they're just getting their money stolen. And I mean, I'm kind of speaking with the choir here, honestly. That's not how that saying goes. But if you're an ESO, you are aware of the issues with the systems in place at this point. And most of them, as far as I'm concerned, can be fixed in the game itself. I mean, most of them would be fixed just by kind of updating the guild store UI, making it work in a functional way, having it so you can search for what you want and vendor stuff off properly, kind of those sorts of things that should, as far as I'm concerned, should have been in the game. This is where things get, to me anyway, get kind of insulting, and they degrade themselves when they just recently promoted a third-party forum to kind of rectify the failings of their own game's guild store functionality. And I have nothing against the site, which is Tesso Elite. And in fact, if you're wanting to trade in the current implementation of the guild store, I would actually recommend them highly. Go check them out. They will be able to help you out and help you find prospective buyers and traders and crafters and all that sort of thing. All that stuff that should be in the game already. But the problem, I mean, this site, it's great, whatever. It came in, it's picking up the slack for ZeniMax, but then ZeniMax comes out and they just basically say, you know what, guys, we done fucked it up, but you know what, here's this crowd of people that are fans that have paid to play our unfinished game. They got the hookup, and it's shameful, honestly. It really, really is. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it a million more times if I have to. You don't release something that is unfinished and unworking, and you should never, ever, 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 ever have to tab out or minimize the game you are currently playing in order to get the full experience of that game or to rectify an in-game flaw. It's broken. You shouldn't have to go out of Guild Wars 2 to get a dungeon finder. You shouldn't have to go out of your Elder Scrolls Online to get an auction house forum set up. You shouldn't, none of that stuff. You should never have to do any of that kind of shit, and it's really annoying that this is seemingly becoming a very commonplace thing. Now, I would be even more pissed. Like, you're probably going, man, calm it down, dude. But I'm honestly sitting at the point where I can almost understand and I can almost give them flack, because this is obviously a byproduct of being forced out of the door too early by the publisher being overbearing. And I mean, it's sad, but that's pretty commonplace. And I just really, all I can say is I hope that they get this fixed in the game. They do so quickly, because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the current implementation is an embarrassment. And then also pushing the load onto a third party, it just shows a lack of caring, honestly. That's really what I feel like. They're just going, you know what, we can put our kind of resources, our time towards other things because this third party is picking up the slack. And maybe that's true, and maybe in the long run it doesn't matter all that much, but man, it pisses me off when that kind of stuff happens, because they should have had this figured out a long time ago. If they wanted to do something different than the typical auction house, then they at least need to get the search shit working. I mean, that's embarrassing. That's really all I gotta say. It's embarrassing right now. But let's move on to something a little less ragey, we'll say, and that is vampires and werewolves. And it's quirky, it's funny, it's weird, it's interesting. And basically what's happening is that the curses associated with vampirism and lycanthropy, vampires and werewolves, it's turning out to be a very lucrative business in Elder Scrolls Online if you are able to offer the curse to people. I mean, players are begging, pleading on their knees. It wouldn't surprise me if they're at their monitor, like praying to get this thing, offering ludicrous amounts of money to be afflicted. Basically, every city, every zone, it doesn't matter where you go, there will be someone there looking to be bitten and to be transformed, and they're trying to get it from anywhere, any person they can. And then on the other side, you also have people advertising to provide that bite, again asking for crazy amounts of money, and if they get the right price, maybe they'll do it. Now, I did expect vampires and werewolves to be really popular. It's a thing. I'm not sure why it's a thing, but it is. But it is insane in this game. It is absolutely insane how much people want to be changed into something that it could turn out to be a real hindrance. Like, vampires and werewolves have some legitimate downsides. Vampires are crushed by fire in seconds. Werewolves go down easy to poison, and I believe they are fairly weak in their human state, unless built like defensively. So they go down fairly easy in their human form. And I mean, what's to say that if you paid like 35,000 gold and you get transformed, what's to say you're going to actually get any bonus or satisfaction from that? That's crazy to me that people, like, they don't really do the research. They're just like, I want to be a vampire, I want to be a werewolf, I want to be Team Edward, Team Jacob, basically. Now, outside of the beggars looking to get a transformation, there are also some other interesting things going on with this, and that's basically that there's a number of guilds and groups of players that seem to be role-playing in a way that's similar to like the Dawn Guard from Skyrim, and they're going around deliberately killing off the specific rare NPCs and mobs that are required in order to contract the infection to begin with. So what's going on is they're running around the zones, they're fending off prospective vampire and werewolf players that haven't been infected but they're looking to, and they're also killing off the NPCs. And at first, I was really turned off by this idea that players were just griefing. But as I read a number of interesting articles and some other player perspectives, it changed my own perspective. And basically what was happening is that by killing off these mobs, and because there's a 7-day cooldown on the vampire bite and the werewolf ritual and stuff, it makes it far more difficult to become one of these creatures, and it adds a sense of realism in terms of how many are actually out there in the world, how many are afflicted, and how many have been changed. Now, there also are so many stories at this point that I've read where the people that are looking to be changed, they're having these crazy adrenaline pumped adventures to outrun the Dawn Guard basically and outmaneuver them so that they can get the vampire infection or to become a werewolf. And it's crazy to me. There's so much competition around the vampire and werewolf virus that it's really making an engaging gameplay experience, apparently. I mean, I read one experience where one person and a small group of others were basically racing to get to the rare spawn, to the creature, and contract the virus. I think in this case it was vampirism. Now, the guy that got out front, he got bitten and instantly killed the thing. So only 1 or 2 people got infected instead of the squad of people behind them. And they instantly began to auction off their newfound power. They began to take bids basically for their vampirism, and that's crazy stuff indeed. And while I dislike the idea of vampire and werewolves selling kind of what I would say their goods and services basically out in town, out in the open, from a lore perspective, that kind of rubs me the wrong way because it doesn't make sense, honestly. But I think legitimately it adds a layer of depth to the game as a whole. And again, I wouldn't have thought this way if it wasn't for so many stories of really just crazy experiences people had trying to get vampirism or fighting against it and stuff like that. And it mostly touches my RP side with this Dawn Guard thing. That's so cool. So props to anyone that's doing that. I think it teeters on that line of griefing just enough, but man, that's really, really cool. And I'm glad to see that there's crazy stuff like this happening so close to the launch of the game, because I would not have expected any of this to come out of vampires and werewolves and the Dawn Guard and all that crazy stuff. I mean, maybe my view will change down the road when and if my view changes and I look towards becoming a werewolf, a vampire or a werewolf myself. So we'll see if the griefing pisses me off down the road. But right now, I think this is actually really, really cool. Now that brings us to the questions from the community segment, starting with a question from a Mr. Charlie Cutmore. How will the Craglorn content update work on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4? Will it be there on day one, or will we have to wait for it? Well, to be honest, I'm terribly unsure on this one, just because of the way that the console market works and the requirements for an MMO. They're quite different on the consoles than it is for the PC. Now, logically, I would hope that they would have them at launch because they have ample time right before the actual console versions come out. But I mean, I personally would imagine that the Adventure Zone Craglorn will be there at launch. The question I have is how it will work in the long run. Will the limitations of the console licensing, the system update requirements, and other console-specific implementations get in the way of timely updates on those platforms? Only time will tell, to be honest, and I would imagine that ZeniMax would very much like versions of their game to be relatively close to one another across all platforms, but it's hard to say until it's all said and done, until we actually get the console version out to see what they're going to be doing with that version of the game. Now, the next question we have is from Billy Bailey. In ESO, we have add-ons. What add-ons are you running, and what ones do you think are the most important? Well, currently I am running the Tamriel Foundry's Tactical Combat UI mod, and an add-on that tracks sky shard position just called sky shards. Now I do look into more add-ons pretty much every day because I do intend to do some mod spotlight on the channel going forward, and in fact I should have a video of the Foundry Tactical Combat add-on coming out very soon. As for what I consider important, I can say at the moment I'm very happy to admit that ESO as of right now does not have any what I would say required add-ons, and hopefully the restrictions ZeniMax put forth for the add-on API will keep it that way. I played WoW for way too long and know exactly what it feels like to have add-ons basically forced onto you because of the way that the game has progressed due to these required add-ons. Basically what happens is the add-ons get to be so well known and so well used, and they legitimately impact your gameplay to the point that the developers have to balance around those required add-ons existence, and it just gets to be a big old mess. Now, all that said, I do think add-ons legitimately enhance your gameplay experience depending on what you want from the game. So for me, the reason I downloaded the Sky Shard add-on was because my gameplay time is rather limited and I'm more of a group content kind of guy. I'm not an adventure guy or a solo guy, so I would rather kind of give up the surprise and the mystery of finding sky shards. That way I don't run into a problem where I'm subpar for my group content because I don't have enough skills because I missed too many skill shards while rushing around and doing all that stuff. If you don't want to lose that mystery, if you want to keep the reward of actually finding it legitimately, then obviously don't download the add-on. But the point really is that you can get add-ons for no matter which situation you want. Like, I know that there's a couple add-ons that are for full immersion factor that are supposed to take away a lot of the UI stuff that kind of takes you out of the game and makes it more like a traditional TES experience, and also vice versa. There's a lot of stuff for the MMO guys and tons of stuff in between. So if you're curious for the add-ons, I would just say check out, I think it's ESOUI.com and Curse.com. Both of those guys have tons of add-ons which you can check out, and yeah, there's lots of good stuff. And then finally, the last question for today comes from Dude the Frog. So some guilds are being released post-launch, i.e. Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild. Are they still being worked on, and how do you think they will work because there is no law system in the game? Well, thankfully, Dude the Frog, we have received some vague information as to how this is all going to happen. Yes, they're still working on it, and it's probably still a ways off, but basically the idea is that ZeniMax is going to implement a law system, as you called it, or a justice system, as they've said it was called previously, and alongside that system, they're also going to release the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood. Basically, they're going to do one large update, one large patch that is completely themed around these crime doers and the opposing faction of fighters and guards that intend to uphold the law, the justice, and the honor, that kind of thing. Now, from what we do know so far, both guilds, the Dark Brotherhood and Thieves Guild, will get their own quest lines similar to what we have currently with the Mages Guild and the Fighters Guild, but they will utilize the justice system as part of the quest lines and make it so that you have to deal with this new system during your endeavors for each guild. Now, the justice system itself, what we actually know and what we actually will receive is hard to say. They've mentioned that they want NPCs and guards to react appropriately to someone stealing items from a vendor, for example, or from going into a private residence that they aren't supposed to be in. Now, they've also said that they may get around to adding a bounty system around so that basically the guards will realize when you have too much notoriety and you're going to go around from these major cities and travel around the world, and these guards and maybe even other players will be able to hunt you down. Now, it all sounds amazing, right? It sounds really, really cool that you could have this almost Assassin's Creed style notoriety thing going on. You could be hunted down by guards and other players, but until we see it, I'm not going to get all giddy, basically. I've been burned way too many times based on the promises of a developer. So until we see something concrete, I would say keep watching their updates and take everything that they say with a grain of salt, basically. But if they implement something even remotely close to what they seem to want to do, this might be like one of the coolest damn things ever, honestly. It sounds really, really cool. So if they can make their vision come true with this thing, they might be on to something, honestly. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, honestly, guys. I think that's going to do it for me. Now, I did record just before Easter holiday, so if there was some news that came out over the weekend, don't worry, I will cover it in the next episode of the podcast. Now, as I said at the beginning, I am still looking for name suggestions for the podcast, but I'm looking to get the community involved as well, and more than just that, I want you guys to submit your questions as you guys did on this last week, so leave those in the comments and in my inbox. If you have gameplay you'd like to share, upload them to YouTube as a response to this video so that I may integrate it into future podcasts. And most importantly, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, leave a comment and send a private message to my YouTube inbox, and I'll see what I can do about getting you on the show for some conversation and discussion about Elder Scrolls Online. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and thanks for listening as well, because this is a podcast. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends, and I will see you on the next one. Bye, guys.